Well, thank you for everyone for joining us today. My name is Mary Price. I'm the Events and Marketing Director at the Shingo Institute at Utah State University. And today we have Peter Barnett, who is the Director of Executive Education at the Shingo Institute with us. Peter joined our staff about a year ago, and he's been involved with the Institute as an examiner for many, many years. Earlier this month, we published an article in our newsletter, which was titled The Power of Daily Improvement. And you can find that article by visiting our website at shingo.org/articles. With that short introduction, Peter, I'll turn the time over to you.
I'm super excited to be here with this group, representatives from all over the globe and some old friends. Really excited to be able to spend a few minutes with you talking about one of the topics that's near and dear to my heart. I think it's probably near and dear to your heart, why we have so many people that signed up for this webinar, and to get into a little bit of the details of the power of coaching. I'm not going to go as deep as I would love. I'd love to spend a whole day with you all and be able to walk through it. We're just going to be able to touch on some things. Hopefully this crowd has been engaged in some of the Shingo workshops. You might have been to conferences or study tours, and you're able to see some of these concepts that I'll be talking about in action. If you haven't, I'd encourage you to do that. It's really just a great opportunity to go deeper, and hopefully this whets your appetite a little bit. You think about this concept of daily improvement. The concept goes across everything, not just coaching, but let me talk about daily improvement for just 1 minute. Many of you have read Atomic Habits, Jim Clear's book. Great, book, great read if you haven't read it. I love it. This whole idea of getting 1% better every day. The math doesn't lie. I mean, you can see the math, right? That it's 1 to the power of 365, 37 times better over the course of 1 year. If you think about that, to me, I saw that it intuitively, I guess it makes sense. In practice, like, wow, that never was the type of improvement I could see, that I could get a 1% better every day, or the people I was working with, or the teams or the leaders I was working with, be able to see that. I understand how it can happen. I understand the power of small incremental improvements. Never able to translate that. My improvement journey was a little bit more of kind of get a little bit of traction and start to see the power, and then see it fall off the map. And then I'm kind of scrambling and struggling to maintain the little bit of gains that I had the day or the week or the year before. So this idea of being able to improve and drive improvement in a way that was consistent with this concept that we preach in the Shingo model of seeking perfection. To me, that's a small improvement every day, and thinking about how do you drive those gains across yourself, across your organization, across the teams, across those that you coach. This concept is one I want to dive into just a little bit today, and make a little bit of a case as to why that's something I think you, in your life as a leader, as a practitioner, should focus on, and how it can have some incredible gains. One, our people are hungry for coaching. Gallup did a poll, their annual poll for employee engagement. And when they looked at some of the best organizations in the world, they saw that there was a stark difference between those and the rest of the organizations when it came to engagement. They estimate that the cost of poor engagement to the world is in the neighborhood of almost $9 trillion. Whether they're off a little bit or not, it's a big number. There's a lot of impact due to this lack of engagement in organizations. They also found that 70% of that gap between the best and the average organization was solely determined by the manager. So Gallup did some other deeper kind of dives in some of these questions that led him to this. And they checked and asked the question, there is something at work someone at work who encourages my development. So that question, pretty simple question, really talks about organizations and how there's lack of engagement there. But they asked that question, there is someone at work who encouraged my development. They also asked a similar question. Last year I had opportunities at work to learn and grow. Well, only 31% could respond strongly to having someone at work that encouraged their development. Only 32% could respond strongly that they had opportunities to learn and grow at work. And to me, that's just a crime. And I think there's opportunity, we can fix that. I think we as leaders and practitioners can work on that. We also have a survey that we use, a survey tool, it's called Insight, that the Shingo Institute, and if you haven't done Insight in your organization, I would encourage you to do that, to think about how you might apply that survey tool in your organization, help you have better insights into how you might improve as an organization. One of the things that jumps out in that on almost every survey is the opportunity to improve in this critical area of coaching. One of the questions we ask, my organizations invest time and resources into developing every employee's potential. And they also ask a similar question, which says that my organization makes my personal development a priority. One thing that jumps out of this as you look at the leaders versus managers and team members is that the leaders score themselves higher than managers or team members on those two questions. And I think it's pretty clear that there's a bit of a bias or a blind spot in many leadership having a higher perception of the organizations and their own personal development opportunities that exist for their team members. That gap is one that, if we can address in organizations, is going to have some critical impact into our organization. So this idea then of coaching for continuous improvements, as I observe many organizations, one of the challenges that I face, I'm guessing many of you face, especially if you're coaching leaders in this in a transformation. Often I'll talk with the leader working on what how their transformation is going, things they want to do, maybe observe some of the way in which their improvement efforts are moving forward. And they'll often tell me, they'll say things like, what's wrong with the way I'm currently coaching my teams, which might be very sporadic, it might be very directive, it might not be very personal, it might not have an improvement model associated with it. What's wrong with it? Look how successful we are. We're making money. So my coaching model can't be wrong. So I hear that. I also hear others who recognize the need to improve coaching, but are overburdened and stressed out. And they'll say things like, if I do your coaching thing, when am I going to have time to do my day job? I mean, I got work to do, yet you want me to throw on top of it all these leader standard work routines, including coaching. But I hear that. And then we hear others who are kind of been beat down and they realize that they're at wit's end. They'll often say, well, how do I start? How do I even start improving as a coach? There's an example I love to use. I'm a big fan of cycling. I ride my bike every day. And I love to watch the Tour de France. And British cycling, historically, late 90s, was not strong, wasn't doing very well, pretty weak, hadn't really won any championships. They brought in a new coach in 2003, Dave Brailsford, and he had a way of approaching it. He had some great riders like Chris Froome and others, and he had a way of approaching improvement of a team that was different than had been used by some of the other coaches. The concept, he calls it the power of marginal gains. And the quote from him as to how he describes it is, the whole principle came from the idea that if you broke down everything you could think of that goes into riding a bike and improve it by 1%, you will gain a significant increase when you put them all together. To me, that sounded a lot like continuous improvement, sounded a lot like kind of seeking perfection. And how do you get to that? What was interesting, what they didn't do, and I want to highlight just a little bit about what they didn't do. The result they wanted was clear. They wanted to win the Tour de France. The way you measure whether you win the Tour de France or not is you have the rider with the shortest time at the end of the race, period. And that's how you win. So they had a clear result that they were trying to achieve, clear KPI. What they didn't do was they didn't sit around and create a bunch of cool slogans about how they were going to be an awesome team. They didn't sit around and kind of visualize, change their mindset of what it feels like to be a winner. They didn't even go out there and just work harder every day, right? They didn't do any of those things. What did they do? Well, Dave and his team constantly measured and monitored the conditions of his cyclists, and they adjusted to improve on any of the weak points. So they looked at things like tires. They looked at different tires, different sizes, different weights, different rubber compounds to try to identify which tires were going to be the fastest on the road and give their riders the best opportunity to succeed. They optimized the tires, marginal gains. They looked at the seats and the saddles. In that case, they were thinking, what can we do to help reduce fatigue for our riders so that they can ride longer, harder, with less, pain and suffering. They did some things that weren't quite traditional, surprised people at first. They thought about, well, what about the rider's suit? They had traditional outdoor suits and indoor suits. They found that with the indoor suits, even using them outdoors was better because they were lighter and more aerodynamic. They did a lot of wind tunnel testing to try to figure out rider position, bike design, and things that could help them improve. They also did some non-traditional areas as they looked across the whole system. They looked at some non-traditional things to see what they could improve. They looked at their pillows. How could they improve their pillows so they could sleep better? They took those pillows with them to every single stage of the Tour de France in order for them to always have a consistent pillow that was better. So when they found those improvements, they locked those improvements in. They looked at hygiene to reduce infection and how could they stay cleaner so that their riders could stay healthier. So all those things really added up to a big shift. They went from 0 wins over 100 years to 59 world championships across various cycling disciplines from 2003 to 2013. So pretty impactful that this approach and this thinking brought. So the question for us is, how can we break that down into, our work? What skill sets of a leader do we break down into those improvable parts that then drive significant improvement? So think of things like, we think of our leaders, we think of often things like their business acumen. We think about how smart they are. We might think about things like their ability to have vision. We think about inspiring. There's elements like their ability to problem solve and maybe even coaching. So all of these are skill sets that leaders can improve. There's interesting, one of these skill sets is a skill set that I've seen many boards looking for new CEOs. I've never seen this skill set of kind of desirables or requirements for that CEO. We don't see it in many VPs. Kind of skill sets that they're looking at when they're looking to bring in a new leader into those roles. It's the one skill set that the street isn't even looking at when the investors are looking at organizations and CEO changes. But it's the one skill set that has the ability to multiply itself 100-fold in an organization if done well. Of course, that skill set's coaching. So how do you take and apply coaching into your work? Many of us will find as we're working with leaders, they're looking for the magic tool that's going to do it for them. A tool I've used a lot is the Coaching Kata, but I will tell you, there is not a magic tool. I've used other coaching models, I've used Grow, and I've used others. The tool is not what's critical. I'll walk into what I think is more critical, but I just want to share with you an example of a tool that could work. Coaching Kata, what's the target condition, actual condition? You remember those 5 steps. What's getting in the way? What's our next step? What's the experiment we can run, right? And then when can we go and observe? So that whole idea of having a methodology, a simple methodology, is critical. There's a lot of tools you can use. What I think is critical is the mindset shift that happens when you coach like this. So a traditional coaching approach, and this is what I think is kind of broken, is that the learner is often the problem. So, hey, the team isn't achieving its goal. You as a leader need to change your behavior so that your team is successful. So I'm coaching that learner and they're very frustrated. It creates a dynamic of being defensive. Hey, it wasn't me. Those guys they don't know what they're doing. And it was, the customer, the supplier, take your pick of different excuses. Very people focused though, and not process focused. It's hard to measure change. Not very objective. It's a feeling that you're not doing well. Very limited impact. And there's also very limited learning. As a learner, my goal is to get out of this situation as fast as I can, not to learn and improve. So when you take that and you want to think about what a kata style approach, not necessarily the tool, but the approach brings to it, you take that problem from being with the learner to being a problem in the system. And as the coach focuses on that problem in the system, in the value stream and where value's flowing, they're able to then focus the learner on how you can eliminate that problem in the flow of work so that the customer can be satisfied. So it takes some of that defensiveness away and makes the problem the bad guy that we together are going to tackle. And it using a structured problem solving model like, plan, do, check, adjust, creates a different connection between the learner and the coach, much more collaborative, more process focused, clear metric of change. I'm moving the needle on that performance indicator in my process. Very direct impact, and it really can help facilitate learning. So as you think about that, you probably could see many of the principles of the Shingo model, showing up in that approach. Respect, leading with humility, thinking systemically, right? Embracing scientific thinking, focusing on process, sure quality at the source, improving flow and pull, creating value for the customer ultimately is why we're doing this. Small incremental improvements seeking perfection and with a really clear constancy of purpose of why we're doing this work. When you want to try to take and build a culture of doing this, it's critical to think about the principles, we call them within a dimension of cultural enablers, the principles that apply, that tell you the why in this case. Respect every individual, lead with humility are two of the principles in cultural enablers. And as you coach to the principles by observing the systems, you're able to actually have a different impact in the way this works. So the question is that I ask as a leader, and I encourage leaders that I'm coaching to ask is, what are the ideal behaviors that are required to achieve the results you desire as a team? And that helps to create that first connection of ideal behaviors will drive ideal results. Then it becomes the behaviors I need. It becomes what gaps are there between what our current behaviors are and the ideal behaviors. How do we address those gaps? And then we do that, we address those gaps not by wanting to close or by talking about them. We do it by taking action in the systems that drive those behaviors, those ideal behaviors, hopefully towards the results that we desire. So that's really how you create this culture of continuous improvement through your coaching. So my call to you is to do more homework and study in this really critical area, but it's to identify to yourself and to your teams as a coach. Declare it. Let them know, I really want to be a better coach. I want your help. I'm going to be trying to use some different principles of coaching in my routines and in my way of working. I'd like your feedback, and I want you to be able to know that I'm declaring that I'm going to try to improve as a coach. Go and observe. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen by bringing people in your office. It happens by going to Gemba. Go and observe. Make every interaction you have a coaching opportunity. Ingrain that coaching model in your mind as you have those conversations. Focus on coaching to outcomes over outputs. Coaching to an output is, did you go to the floor once a day every time last month? That's an output. The outcome is, are you having the right conversation that's changing the dynamic and the behavior in the team? And is that driving the right result? That's the outcome we want. We might need many different outputs, but they're not the goal. They're the means to the goal of that outcome. And then ultimately take time to personally reflect on yours and your organization's culture and how you can impact that through improving your coaching. It's been super fun connecting with you for a few minutes. I think we have a few minutes for some questions. And so, Mary, I think we'll turn it over to you and we can see if we have any questions out there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Peter. That was great. It's a nice little reminder that we all can, add to our daily lives, right? Okay, so we have a question about the slides. Yes, I will send a link out to everyone. And for those of you that are listening on the podcast, we will include the link as well in the podcast summary, so you'll be able to refer to those as well. Okay, here's another question. Who would you recommend doing the coaching? Is it everyone or is it just managers?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm assuming it's a bit of a rhetorical question, but I found in organizations, it's interesting. Uh, Great organizations, coaching becomes very natural, even at the peer-to-peer frontline level. So I was in an organization where we were struggling with safety. It was a explosives manufacturing company, union shop. So you can imagine that there was a lot of struggles um, with some of that manager worker relation. There were certain roles, things you did, certain things you didn't do. And coaching would have normally been one of those things that the union member would not do, that the manager would have to do, right? So there would be a big distinction. What we were able to do, and we started it through our safety program, was to create safety observations. And we taught the folks when it came to safety, they were more willing to give feedback. So we create, and by learning to give feedback to their team members and learning structured ways of giving it, learning ways to, they started to realize that they could start to influence their team members, not by pointing, directing, ordering, but through giving them positive feedback. Hey, I observed that when you walked on those stairs, you weren't using the handrail. That's an unsafe practice. And you'd be safer if you were to keep your hand on the handrail as you were walking up the stairs. Simple. Give them that feedback. They would capture those little bits of feedback. We would track them, and we would then celebrate, as we captured so many of those safety observations. So we found very clearly, though, that team members were learning how to coach constructively to improve behaviors of their peers. So to me, it just changed the whole dynamic of the organization. Everybody started to become a little bit less apprehensive to coaching. Obviously, it's a critical role of leaders, and most leaders, if you look at the time they have on their calendar, they've got 110% of their day allocated, and then they add in, I know I need to coach, and it just doesn't fit. So I think the greatest leaders I've seen have been able to structure their calendars so that they start with coaching, and then they use coaching to multiply their ability to have more impact on the time with their teams and doing their other critical work. So the answer to me is everyone.
Okay. So we have another question and they ask, where do you start when the organization is totally green from management to employees? Would you say how you answered with safety? Would you say that that was a good place to start?
Great. I think safety is a great place to start. I mean, it's kind of a universal unifier, right? Especially if you're dealing in an organization that has a lot of risk associated with it around physical harm. I have seen organizations like financial services where their risk of customer harm was actually what their unifying factor. So you can imagine in a financial services, you're not probably going to get hurt coming to work that day. But what could happen is something that you do could actually harm a customer. And that risk ripples through your organization because regulatory agencies and others and reputational risk and things get impacted very hard. So in that organization, risk and risk behaviors that could lead to, failing to meet customer commitments or anything else that could cause potentially some kind of violation of some rule or law, obviously became unifying factors where you could do that same type of thing. So I think safety is a great place to start. When in doubt, go there. I think safety can lead into continuous improvement, which then creates a model that opens the organization. But I would say think about your organization and what's your biggest pain. That might be the area to focus in. So if you are really struggling with, you just had a big recall in your organization, it could be a quality thing that you might need to focus on. But I think it is important to choose something.
Another question, any advice on how to influence high-level leaders to move from directive leading to coaching?
Yeah, that is so tough. What I've done and what I can think of one leader that really struggled with this, and we did two things with that leader. One, we had him, tell his team, declare, I'm trying to improve as a coach. I realize I've got some of these tendencies and behaviors, and I want to change. So he made that declaration. One that opened up the door for them to be able to give feedback when they saw a behavior inconsistent with what he said he wanted to do. And the other thing, we gave him one simple simple task. We found that this leader struggled with when people would give him feedback, he would defend it right off the bat, right? He just was going to defend it. And we said, there's only one thing we want you to do. We're not going to try to change the world. Anytime you get feedback, your first response has to be thank you. And it was amazing to see the change in this leader as someone would say, oh man, this new chair on the production cell, this sit stool thing, it just isn't working for me. And when his first comment came back as, thank you for that, it changed his answer. Instead of normally it would have been, well, don't you know that you're just not using it right and we need to change and it's your problem. It's not this because the safety guys came up with it and they're smart. Instead, it was thank you. Suddenly it diffused everything. And then it also triggered in that leader that, oh, wait a minute, I need to change my old behavior, because that trigger word of thank you caused him to think. So I would say yes, helping them be aware of it. I've seen leaders watch videotapes of themselves going to Gemba, and that can be a very powerful tool. You don't have to say anything. What do you see? What do you observe? Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm behaving like that. So I would be conscious of it and just keep calling it out. Hopefully that leader has a desire to change.
Okay. We have another question. They ask if there's any best practices you would recommend for going to Gemba, but I'd also like to add, you mentioned that you want people to start your day with coaching.
Yeah.
What kind of time limit would you recommend for that? And is the Gemba part of that?
That's a great question. So, I think one of the things I hinted to is every interaction you have, conference room, at the Gemba, in the cafeteria, whatever, can be a coaching moment, a coaching interaction if you approach it right? So you really could almost consider yourself, depending on your layer in the organization, as coaching most of your day. I would say that when you think about going to Gemba, oftentimes that can become very mechanical. I go to Gemba at 10:30 every day, whether I need to or not. I do these things. I go on this routine. It becomes very mechanical almost in the way you approach that routine. I think that to me, being able to make it more natural and trying to find opportunities to create space in your time in your day to get in there. I had my best and funnest coaching when I would coach off shifts because I wasn't supposed to be there. I had some time, nobody expected it, and I wasn't booked by anything else pulling me around. So I had some of my best interactions in coaching, hitting some of those off shifts. So however you're struggling to get kind of shifting in your dynamic of a coach, I would say just start anywhere. But Gemba, obviously, where the work happens, is there's no substitute for that.
Right. Next question. What examples can you share that highlights a one-on-one conversation?
Yeah. So one-on-one conversation, the thing that's powerful about one-on-one conversations is it allows you to, just think about the neuro-linguistic. If you ever studied much of neuro-linguistic programming, some of the dynamics that happen just in the way in which you communicate, not what you say, but how you say it and how that can influence what people are hearing and seeing. When you're having a one-on-one conversation, it allows you to, you can turn down your voice. You can speak in a soft tone. You can say things maybe more slowly in ways that could have lots of impact. You can share more emotion. And I think that really what you're trying to make in a one-on-one coaching session is not some kind of radical change. You're trying to make a connection, a human connection to someone else. They need to know you care before they're going to care about what you know. You've probably heard that. So I think that a dynamic of one-on-one, being able to connect personally with someone. And I would say my goal of a one-on-one interaction, normally number one priority is to create some kind of a connection. And if I don't even get to the point that I needed to get to relative to change in process or behavior or something else, if I can just make a stronger connection through that, I'm probably going to have success, even if I don't address the details of the issue, but it's going to set up the space that I would be able to have a more effective conversation. So make sure when you're doing those that you're taking the time to just close your mouth, listen, to really try to make a personal connection with that individual.
Perfect. All right, thank you. I think that's all that we have time for. I think we answered the questions. If you felt like you have additional questions, feel free to reach out to Peter, peter.barnett@usu.edu. He'd be happy to answer some questions for you as well. And I just wanted to make a note before we leave that we will be, if you would like to meet us and come to conference and be able to network with each other and learn, we are celebrating our 37th anniversary at Provo back in Utah. We'll be there on April 28th through the 30th. We hope that you'll come and share. We're making our big announcement of what our theme is tomorrow. So if you don't already know from following social media, be on the lookout for that. We're going to share it tomorrow. So we hope to see you there. And thanks again for joining today. And we'll see you again next month. Thank you.
Take care all. Bye-bye.